you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to follow a very wise speech, and some of the points I may reflect on in my shorter speech. I wonder if it's, you'll forgive me, Mr. Speaker, if I will also just pay reference and pay respect to our two departed colleagues in the last 12 months. The loss of Gerald Kaufman and of Joe Cox, both deeply and strongly felt. Both made huge contributions to this place, to their constituencies and to our wider community. We reflect upon Gerald Kaufman's career in this place, which has lasted as long as I have been alive, and we reflect not just on his great contribution to the Labour Party and to our national public life, but also we contrast that with the single solitary year that Joe Cox spent in this place, and in so many ways made as big an impact. And it is right that we celebrated her life and her values in the great get-together just recently. It's something I hope that will continue for many years to come, as we stand by her and her family and her legacy in those years to come. I think it's also right, if you'll forgive me, if I also make reference to some of the appalling situations that have taken place in this country in the last few weeks. The Grenfell Tower tragedy is something that I think has left many of us utterly speechless. The sense of appalling tragedy, the horror that those people have had to go through, the immense loss, personal loss, the loss of loved ones, the loss of everything, is something that we can barely imagine ourselves. But, you know, I think there is something very different about this tragedy in that it is a source of, and I feel it myself, if I'm honest, of great anger, because whatever we say and whatever we do, the implications of what happened and the loss of those dozens and dozens of lives is that some lives in our society are apparently worth less than others. That is how that came to pass. That is how that outrage came to take place. And we must learn from that, and we must take action to demonstrate we have learned from that. And the terrorist incidents, the three of them, at Finsbury Park just recently, at London Bridge and in Manchester, we have all spoken at length about those and about our horror and our outrage at what happened. But let's remember what terrorists seek to do. They do seek to divide us, and our response must be to be united. I went to the Muslim Welfare Centre next to Finsbury Park Mosque last night, and amongst the people I met, I had the honour of meeting Mohammed, the young imam, who was so whose dignity just shone out on the night of that attack, and who actually protected the assailant from a very, very dangerous situation. And it is a reminder that when we speak about the different communities in our country, that we must do so with care and with love and with inclusion. And not just us in politics, to use language, as the Right Honourable member who spoke just before me rightly pointed out, not just in our language as politicians, but dare I say gently, that our friends in the media must also be immensely careful how they report these kinds of incidents, and indeed all matters to do with community relations in this country. If you are a person living in a non-diverse part of the United Kingdom, and you only get your information about community relations, about terrorism and risks from certain newspapers, then you will end up in a situation where you believe there are problems that perhaps there are not, where you demonise others when there is absolutely no place for that. And we have to work incredibly hard in uniting our communities to do so by using language that is right, that is inclusive, and that makes sure we do not allow those who seek to damage us, to divide us, to actually win. So, yeah, sure, thank you.
Because he started his speech by making or paying tribute to Joe Cox and Gerald Kaufman, but I hope he doesn't mind if I also mention Paul Keach. Paul, who was a comrade of ours, was a member of Parliament for many years and retired through ill health, sadly died just before the general election, and I think Paul is somebody that we will miss greatly.
grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising that. Paul, of course, was a step down from this House in 2010, but a friend and colleague of mine. And I'm bound to say, amongst his many other achievements, he was the defence spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats during the Iraq War. And people will remember, wrongly, that the Liberal Democrats took the popular side in opposing the Iraq War. We didn't. We took the unpopular side. And sometimes it's important to do right, and Paul Keach sat there and stood there next to the equally late and great Charles Kennedy in making that case at that very difficult time for our country. I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising it. I will. I've not really begun, but yes, go ahead.
Can I just reinforce the message you made about Imam Mohammed Mahood? Because I think his words, which I think ought to be in everyone's mind, is by God's grace they managed to stop him being attacked and prevent worse things happening. Heaven knows what would have happened if the attacker had suffered serious damage. The headlines would have been very different. So we owe a great deal to that Imam and people like him.
We absolutely do, and I think he was an example of what genuinely unites us, and our love and concern for others, and indeed he reflects the values of the colossal majority of Muslim people in this country, and it's important we reflect that. May I, in their absence now, also pay tribute to the humorous, witty and wise remarks of the mover and seconder of the response to the gracious speech, and move on to my own remarks, which I promise won't be all that lengthy. Whether they'll be wise, well, you can judge at the end. The Prime Minister is not in a place now. She's entitled not to be, but she and I have a lot in common. We both contested North West Durham in 1992, and neither of us won. We both led our parties in the recent general election, and neither of us won. And soon, neither of us will be leading our parties anymore, but at least I've got the honesty to admit it publicly. Britain is, for all its immense and glorious heritage and its potentially wonderful future, all its tremendous values, it's nevertheless, as a country, in a mess. And it is essentially a mess caused by two choices made by two Conservative Prime Ministers who put their party before their country. First, David Cameron called a referendum on Europe for no other reason than to attempt to put a sticking plaster between two sides of the Conservative Party. Second, our current Prime Minister thought she could gain narrow party advantage by calling a snap election. Pride comes before a fall, and it is tempting to be amused at the hubris turned to humiliation that has now come upon the Conservative Party. But the problem is that this is a mess that damages Britain, that damages the future for all of our children. So to the gracious speech, well, Her Majesty has launched many ships in her time, never such an empty vessel as the one today. I'm not sure whether wasting the monarch's time is a treasonous act. I hope for the Prime Minister's sake that it is not. But the Queen's speech shows that we have a government that has lost touch with its people and lost touch with reality. If they have the first foggiest idea what the will of the people is now, they have chosen to ignore it. Why is there no additional investment in health or social care? As 2 in 3 of our head teachers across our country in the next few weeks are having to lay off teaching staff, why is there no plan to cancel the £3 billion worth of cuts to our schools? I'll happily give way.
I'm very grateful to I very much agree with what he's saying. He mentioned about the fact that there is no extra funding for health. The Queen's speech also makes reference to prioritising mental health within the NHS. Does he share my horror at the gap between the rhetoric and the reality? Because the reality is that the constraints that NHS England are putting on many areas of the country means that mental health is losing out here and now, not being prioritised, as the Queen's speech claimed.
I mean, my right honourable friend is absolutely right and speaks with immense experience and capability and a record in this area. A reminder that warm words from the government are not sufficient when hard cash is not present. And my party during the election offered the British people the opportunity, that of course they did not take, to place a penny on income tax in order to pay for real investment in health and social care, and including as a priority mental health Also, I say that because somebody needs to be honest, I think, with the British people, that if we want the best health and social care in the world, then we will have to pay for it. I will briefly give away one further time.
Just ought to explain to those listening to this debate that Her Majesty never gives a public spending statement. I think there will be more money for health and education. That will be made at another time by the Chancellor's Exchequer. This is a list of laws we're going to pass. Doesn't he see how significant the Brexit law is?
In a moment. I think it obviously, though, is nevertheless the gracious speech as a statement of the government's priorities. And when we have a conversation which we rightly have about our security as a country, that the government is not seeking to do something to strengthen in number our police force, the most obvious way of making sure we are all kept safe, also beggars belief. But as the... I'll have to give way.
I hasten to Rena's parade, but can he actually just remind us, when he was actually in coalition with the Conservative governments, did he raise any of the points around, for example, the cuts in police funding, or object to any of the things, for example, the non-prioritisation of mental health and other spending?
The short and blindingly obvious answer is yes, and the fact there was no savings made in the security services funding whatsoever is testament to that. And the fact that we have in my right honourable friend, the member for North Norfolk, the person who has done most to advance mental health in this country from a government bench in living memory, is something which is testament for that. But the Prime Minister has pursued and continues to pursue, it's very clear from recent statement and from the gracious speech, that she seeks to pursue an extreme version of Brexit, having failed to gain any mandate to do so. There is no plan to keep Britain in the single market, as the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe mentioned earlier, or indeed for the Customs Union. We will therefore seek to amend the Queen's speech to add in membership of the single market and of the Customs Union. We are pleased to hear that there are 50 colleagues from the Labour Party here who take a similar view in believing that we should be members of the single market. Access to the single market is a nonsense. There are many countries around the world that have access to the single market. I could be wrong, but I think North Korea has got access to the single market. The issue is, are we members of that market? And the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe earlier pointed out that apparently we all believe in free trade now. Well, don't believe what people say, believe what they do. People may say we're in favour of free trade now, but if they vote through these lobbies in the coming weeks and months for us to not be members of the single market, and therefore not just rip up the biggest free trade deal we've got anywhere with the largest and most valuable economy on the planet, but also rip up second-hand those deals with South Korea and the rest of it as a consequence, then those people are not free traders. I will give away, I think, one last time.
Very much for giving way. Can I just genuinely ask him, this is a genuine inquiry, if we were to retain membership of the single market and membership of the Customs Union, what in his view is different to being a member of the European Union with that arrangement?
Well, he and I think I'm right in saying, will have made the case during the referendum that those who say Norway was a model to follow would say, well, that you get the benefits, the economic benefits of being within the European Union, but not the political ones. You don't get decision-making powers and all the rest of it. And so Norway was always the least dreadful option on the ballot paper, so to speak, or on the menu if we were to leave the European Union. And if we're leaving the European Union, it remains the least dreadful option. And I'm all in favour of the least dreadful option if we can't have the absolutely best one. So I think it's also fair to say that the lack of clarity over the Brexit, or the version of Brexit this government is pressing for and is pursuing, is also alarming. What does success look like? What does a bad deal look like? Nobody knows, because the government plan is as clear as mud, and the only detail we've had are empty platitudes. The government today has presented us with a number of so-called Brexit bills, immigration, customs, agriculture, but how on earth can we be expected to support these things when we have no idea what the end goal is? The majority of people in this country did not put their faith in this government at the ballot box, and it would be dangerous for any member of this House to put blind faith in these Brexit bills without full details of what they mean for our borders, our trade, our security and our jobs. As the Brexit Secretary begins the horse trading and concession making with politicians in Brussels, the fact is we are no closer to knowing what Brexit will look like. And those who have expressed concern about the people of this country having sovereignty over the laws of this country, and this House having sovereignty, must surely see the irony, of our children and grandchildren's future now being stitched up in vape-filled rooms in Brussels and being imposed upon the British people without a single member of this country outside this House having any say whatsoever. And yet still, the Prime Minister refuses to give the people the final say on that deal, with the right to reject it and remain if they do not think that is a good deal. So the Prime Minister pretends this is business as usual. Clearly, that is not the case. She wanted a landslide. The people said no. She wanted a mandate for her plans for an extreme version of Brexit, and the people rejected that too. She promised strong and stable leadership, but no government has ever looked weaker or less in control. The Prime Minister has gone cap in hand to the DUP and tried to stitch up a deal to keep her in power, and now they are making her look like a fool as well. I fear... I will give way one final time.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. He criticises our approach to the DUP. His party has long advocated coalition, and yet when it thinks it not politically expedient, has now abandoned all faith in coalitions altogether. For how long will their moratorium on coalitions last?
I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman for his question. We are a party who believes in pluralism, and we only reflect on the appalling nature of first past the post, that it gives us these unstable and unbalanced electoral outcomes, and maybe we should change the system. My reflection is this, and for what it's worth, there have been many things said about the DUP. I'm going to make one observation, which I hope people consider as a neutral and honest one, and that is this: the achievement of peace in Northern Ireland was incredibly hard won at great cost, and something that all active politicians in Northern Ireland, including those sat behind me now, are owed great credit for. The difficulty I have is simply this: that the current government, minority government, will be perceived to have taken sides for the first time in decades. And that is a responsibility that this government, the Prime Minister and the DUP themselves will need to deal with as we seek to maintain that hard-won peace. I made it clear, just to answer the point raised a moment or two ago, that throughout the election that my party would do no deals and form no coalitions, and we would only support a Queen's speech if we felt it was in the interests of the country. We go on, finally.
The argument which the member has used has been employed by a wide range of people. But would he accept that as a party elected to this national parliament, we have every right, representing the people of Northern Ireland, to play the fullest part that we choose to play in this parliament, and if we decide that that means we support the party opposite or we sit on these benches, that is our right, and that's what we're elected to do.
For what it's worth, I absolutely accept all of that. And my view is simply this, that members behind me don't need me to tell them how sensitive perceptions are. Reality is one thing, but perceptions might as well be reality, Mr. Speaker. And my concern is how this will be viewed, and what does this mean for this most sensitive time in Northern Ireland, in fact in the island of Ireland's history. That is something we all ought to be concerned about. I don't say that to make a partisan point or to deny members of the DUP the right to represent their constituents, or indeed, should they choose to do so, to form some kind of arrangement with the current government. So we could, as Liberal Democrats, have supported a Queen's speech that set out a Brexit negotiating position to keep us in the single market and the customs union, with a referendum on the final deal once all the matters were negotiated. That indeed pursued a cross-party approach to the negotiations in the first place. Why I have called in recent days for there to be a joint Cabinet Committee, of course chaired and led by the Prime Minister, but including Labour, Liberal Democrats and Nationalists into the bargain, so that we have a deal negotiated on behalf of all of us. We would have voted indeed for a Queen's speech that set out a real terms increase in schools funding, gave that cash injection to the NHS and social care, invested the extra 300 million in police officers to keep us safe, as we had argued for, and that set out a real set of action on climate change, air pollution and supported renewable energy. But that is not the Queen's speech the Prime Minister set out, and so my party will not support it.
Thank you.